Continuing on those themes, hope I don't get throttled. Um, Contrasting these kind of technocrats on the city, begging the question, what are cities for? What will they become after a cataclysm like COVID? What were they interconnected? What were they in an interconnected way? Is data gathering an ends in itself? We see that trend too. Technocratic, nominalists, positivists simply gather the data and we shall determine what happens after that. Not realizing there's usually two things in the machine, a ghost in the machine and a spirit, so called vitalism within the individual, that the individual wants to spend a beautiful night out in East Village looking at all the pretty things, feeling alive, feeling immersed, even if they're on a huge line, very amazing, to a club or bar, and that the real party in a post COVID situation, very close, no social distancing, masks are optional. Somehow this became assumed vaccination, that there's a return back to the analog, a return back to the spectacular city. Very interesting. Also, we're talking about the method of this class, the method of amassing data. Hopefully, you guys got out there to live it, live the life, not just have a machine make the life for you in replication and go back. We talked about continue to talk about the invention of morale, the novella, to which the first idea of hologram replicated people happened on this deserted South Pacific island, and the people had already died. The fugitive falls in love with the Louise Brooks type character, and realizing she's dead already, tries to interface with her, replicate, mimic, goes over and over, much like these movies. Truman Show, Oblivion is a famous Tom Cruise movie to which he keeps playing the game aspect. His love interest enters in as a co-warrior, until they reach that point where they remember they can't continue dying as in game. That the aliens had, in a sense, played with time. The hero, Tom Cruise, can keep replicating his life after death in time until he gets the game right. Most of this, ironically, assumes a technocratic begging of the question. If it is made, it's good for something. If replication is made, legitimacy doesn't matter, analysis doesn't matter, even human spirit, vitalism, mojo doesn't matter. The fact that it was made, such as in the fact of making a $2 billion bomber, stealth bomber, that we have to use it. The fact that after 911 we will survey everybody, phone conversations, emails, so forth, still begs the question of, oh, it was good for something, in the fact of using that replication, that recording to go back into replication as part of the gig. Forecasting scenarios, backcasting, the three methods imagining what a city will become. Predicts most likely future, explores alternative futures scenarios, which I like. Backcasting means we immerse ourselves in a timeless beauty of a summer Friday night out in the East Village, with everyone looking good on an aesthetic level, sensing that they're not caring about their IoT data generation, but they're just caring to be immersed into their present life. Same thing with love. Same thing with lovemaking. Same thing with filial projects with parties. There's a certain timelessness, and sports events. You don't calculate how well you're going to ski down a slope. You immerse yourself into a kinesthetic reaction and do it. I am employing abduction into this process. Um, uh, we have theories, concepts, we make hypotheses, and we go to the empirical observations, or they happen first. We go to abstraction and then back to theories. Deduction, induction, these two polarities are abduction. Um, uh, Reproduction, reproducing more beautiful graphs. Model base, theoretical abduction, moving further through this um, into language theories, not to live in the language games of deduction, uh, kind of forgetting that if you have data, let's just input it in this box and get these magical clock-like results. Same with a city. These theorists, architectural and internet theorists, do rightly talk about Frank Gehry and the Starchitects using these new parametric architectural things. Um, the museum at Bilbao is iconographic as something that mimics something alive, but it is dead. It is inert. It does not respond to IoT or the behavior of people or something that happens in and around it. In a sense, it's a sculpture or almost like a very beautiful exotic insect pinned and put up on a collection. They speak of other things. The Metabolists of the late 60s, when I lived in Tokyo, was accidentally walking through the edge of Ginza and came across the famous, I forget his architect's name, the famous Metabolist Tower built in the 60s, where each of these cubes was to be interchangeable, and it never happened. Once it's built, it remained static, that there was no real time-based flow of behaviors and information around it. Of course, in the 60s, they did not have smartphones in the pockets, but even now, the metabolist credo algorithms of mutability through time, also with the minimum of space, does not work itself out in something as impermanent as architecture. Backcasting, we go from the future with our movies, our Oblivion, I think that movie was called. There was a couple other interesting Tom Cruise, well, certainly Minority Report, guessing culpability, which is what we get from data. An old Phil K. Dick short story. Oblivion is another story of life as a game theory, that the aliens have created these game scenarios that if you hack the game, you can figure out how to die and regenerate, thus figuring out the aspects of linear time, coalescing in an abductive reasoning of what you should do if given the context. Forecast, backcasting allows ourselves to put ourselves in a future, imagine intangible yet eternal. I do this a lot. Eternal future to which we make scenarios, we forecast, we take the next steps. Certainly is daunting considering economic degeneration and the kind of Faustian, bad, toxic aspects of the neoliberal economy still running on basically pyramid schemes. But we see an aversion to giving up our pyramid schemes because they imply legitimacy, something to work for. Abductively noticing the long lines of beautiful young people outside these clubs last night, this spectacular aspect of waiting, of anticipating, of departure, as Virilio would say, is still part of that experience in immersion. Framework, foresight, another method. There are all sorts of methods that futurists use. Framework. If I hustle here, I can get onto the aspect of finding where it is all going. But we did see, as Baudrillard pointed out, that the death has been largely prohibited. That in Symbolic Exchange and Death, his essay, his book, talking about the nature of semio-capitalism, that we can talk about anything. We can talk about deductive method. It's putting in a box. Machines for livings, computers for livings, IoT, all that come in, but we must banish the notion of death. To me, the character of Kurzweil, Ray Kurzweil, talking about singularity, has this Sartrean bad faith that death and entropy can be arrested and eliminated in his desire to recreate his conductor father who he had an incomplete relationship with. Many of the current humanist philosophers are talking about methods for completeness. Certainly a lot of the French semioticians, the empiricists devoted to studying kind of the implicit, explicit biologies, hormones, not defying sense in denial of bedrock sort of empirical processes. Immanuel Kant talking about the phenomenal and the nominal world, never really completely understanding the nominal world, an Enlightenment concept that led into Romanticism. And frankly, the neo-Romanticism of bottom-up development. Last night, society played through the cell phone interface the coming out of COVID with these people on the street, their use of arrival departure. Endless departure cannot exist endlessly. It must adhere to a notion of arrival at some time. What are these arrivals? The good meal, the drinking to excess, the hookup, the posting on Instagram of a beautiful selfie, a beautiful food selfie, a sunset. That we look toward this Kurzweilian replication to reinforce ourselves that yes, we're living in bad faith, but it is all we have. Problem. Wildcard scenario, probable trends, plausible, possible. All within the cone are possible. Possible, probable, business as usual, probable, preferable. Hopefully with the mass amount of data as we look for the preferable. Many subalterns within our 500-year history point back to the notion of colonialism and its excesses and its problems, often not considering what is happening here now, the rise, the ascendancy of China, a whole new system of hegemony. It is kind of a romantic look back, as if everyone has a PhD in history now, look back to the injustices, the contradictions, the abuses, the evil of the colonial project, and not looking forward to other non-Western systems of hegemony. It's a type of narcissism, I think, entitlement and narcissism that says, we're here, we're now, let's look backward to all the excesses and victimology, whereas the new tsunami's happening. Economic gambling, ecological collapse, the ascendancy of a new system, a hegemony, China, possible military conflicts. These are areas that need a hard look without continually deferring back to a Hegelian picture of master-slave dichotomies. Yes, has to be dipped into, but it is as if we are replicating, choosing from history, instead of forecasting, moving ahead to greater challenges. Types of future, again, these graphs, vision implications, alternative futures, this idea that we, with the data, we have a willpower, We can forge our own preferable future as it is, without the business as usual in decline. But are we, on a societal level, a replication of this character Kurzweil in the singularity? Oh, computers will, because of the bandwidth, bring it all together, and I can reinvest in a basic AI. I can reinvest my father, who I never had a complete relationship with, hugely Freudian. Um, and why should we live in his notion of a bad faith? Why didn't you have a good relationship? Did you try? Was it you? Was it your father? What if you, at this point, know you had a bad relationship? Why are you taking newspaper clippings of your famous conductor father and amassing these so one day, when the singularity happens, the machine can reconstitute your father and you can live this archival relationship with it? This is so like the invention of morale. It is prophetic. Why would the fugitive, Kurzweil as the fugitive, want to replicate previous existence? Let's go on. All of these model-based, graph-based, dynamic-based systems speak of a type of notion. Let's we want cinema and landscape, structure and painting. We want Evolo. Looking at, if I can get it up here. Can I? No, I cannot. Please show up. Here we are. Oh, I didn't float this on top. There we go. Hivolo is an exciting Italian magazine talking about the future as glossy, the future as new, the future as taking all these ideas in one document, one object, one relationship, which is the skyscraper. Pretty dynamic. These things are amazing constructs. They are very unique. They are filled with Freudian desire and contradictions and aspects of the masculine, the feminine, the notion, unabashed notions of exhibitionism, of a vanity that can never be transcendent, as in Kurzweil. We can replicate life forms in a huge skyscraper, and this is, I often go back to this magazine looking for aspects of this, these wonderful science fiction works by young architects, student architects, grad student architects, dreamers, prognosticators, everyone making a hit on what will building be like in the future, but not just building, what will these very, very daunting coalescence of psychology, aesthetics, and engineering be, and use value. Why are they even useful? There's kind of a building frenzy right now, to which, if they are not filled, the space will merely be warehoused. As I understand, a lot of the Hudson Yards are. Hudson Yards was kind of fabricated to make space for recent wealthy immigrants from overseas, recreating all the franchise luxury stores. Is it really in a state of health? All of the gas stations, all of the parking lots, every available property is being scooped up by this new land speculation, making, coalescing, and warehousing possible space. Meanwhile, people need to arrive at affordable housing, need to arrive at a place that is safe from viruses. The outflux of people to upstate is now returning. Many of those relationships from personal observation have not lasted. They've collapsed, creating interesting dynamics that way. And these people prognosticate the future in these wild skyscraper designs, basically, by Evolo magazine. As a young kid, I just poured through these um, Italian, basically, kind of a legacy of futurism, Italian futurist magazines found in the form of uh, Domus, Arbitare, Ivolo, Octagonal, Spectacolo. The Italians, to me, were taking from their rich Albertian past, the Renaissance architect who separated himself from the craft tradition of building and entered into the drafting aspect of building, that you can make something ideal on paper, then build it. It really, uh, a formulation out of Alberti, and instead of treating a building as kind of a sculpture, you have a push and analog push and pull with. You do it on paper. You do it in a virtual environment. That legacy has continued. His notions of perspective, Spengler called that rise in consciousness perspectival. We saw a reversal of that into relativist at the end of the 19th century, beginning of Einstein's physics, into a relativity again from the perspectival. So we saw the idea of the architects making things on paper, a virtual environment, hoping they get built, leaving the craft traditions of building in the beautiful Italian cities were very organic, and entering maybe into ideas of replications. Why can't cities be metabolisms? We see that process. Skyscrapers, metabolistic. This is a wild tower. Initially, in this method of abduction, I want you people to be hit in the gut. Respond to just the logic, the half-second visual logic of each piece as I responded to, what is it, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, first seeing it, super hot day, taking the over, what do they call it? It's not subway, it's a tram, it's a, it used to be called, Disneyland, the tram over, um, and seeing it far in the distance, large, disappearing into the hot summer, not even summer sky, fall sky in the desert, um, wondering how many of these spaces are occupied, wondering, just like the economy of war, the economy of post World War II wars, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq 1 and 2, is this creative destruction? Do we build skyscrapers as a Keynesian economic project of disposing over accumulated wealth in a neoliberal economy? Quick answer, yes. But the amazing, amusing, aesthetic answer is just the dreamers. Why make these potlatch articles? This is much like Dubai here, that reach up in some fantastic configuration. You can immediately put yourself inside as immersion. You feel walking through this. I lived in Songdo for a month, taught there at the SUNY campus. Way at the other end, there was all segregated by functions across space. So the universities and research belts were way over on the north side. You could see North Korea on a clear day from one of the skyscrapers, always an issue. Um, and what did it feel like being inside a Metabolist? I had Colby almost every night. I felt the loneliness. I would bike through the streets at night watching the old Ajumas like make little simple gardens out of the empty lots. There was a boots on the ground, bottom up efficiency with these older women just trying to make food in Songdo, knowing that in a sexist way, most of the men had headed into the city to commute. A lot of the wives would remain with the children inside the beautiful parks. But this was a city in miniature, responding to the airport. Helicopters flying in the metabolist units. These are things of movies. In pretty much sci-fi town of Seoul, which is combined with all these impoverished aspects, the moon cities up on the hills where all the refugees went after the Korean War and squatted and lived there, and now they're removing them. The hills of Seoul were the only place they could go after losing their houses. The discrepancy between older people who survived the hardships of post-Korea War economic development, the younger people who in general seem to have amnesia, the filial respect that most East Asian cultures have for older people is disintegrating. So we have a disparity we have a bandwidth in epochs of understanding who benefited from the creation of the new Korea and who sacrificed themselves. Much like the immigration to America, who was a doctor, physicist, chemist, engineer in Karachi, how he or she came to Hicksville or drove cab in downtown so that their children could go to public research universities studying STEM subjects and reapplying this nominalist notion that a STEM mastery means using the data. So these economics begs the questions, the very practical questions. More of these spaces, the units, how they're made, the fantastic biomorphic shapes. Is this like Guggenheim Bilbao? Are these basically just sculptures, sculptures to live in? Like they're designed down to pens in the sci-fi view of pens. Minimalism as opposed to complexity, biomorphic complexity. Are these the exhibitions of these things? There were a couple of showrooms in Songdo that I would go to just walk through. Pretty well combination of minimalism and complexity. Internet of Things, how your space is monitored. But to purchase one of these would be beyond your notion of compensation through life. It was somewhat daunting. New building materials, 3D printing, actually printing and making and moving buildings as responding to coral, that it generates itself using new materials, biomimicking. These are places of dreams. Clusters, metabolism, the mutability of skyscrapers, the beauty and the biomorphic generation, floating cities, more pens, response to the skyscrapers, rigid right angles, 3D forms, biomimicry, again, the beauty of 3D printing, taking on the notions of the inhospitable environments such as rising sea levels and creating cities on them. Phallic, superego, ego coalescences of places, cities on the edge of deserts, Ferris wheel cities. This is really remarkable for a place to have young architects and designers dream of building materials, new building materials. In the last mailing I sent you, were all new building types, resources at your disposal. Different shapes, forms, interesting shapes. Again, in a true abductive nature, let the data, let the phenomena hit you before you place a dogmatic, prejudicial value judgment on it. Let the data take you over, as in this example, just looking at the elaborate follies, dreams, excesses, fantasies, spectacles, opera, everything dramatic about this, everything intuitive, everything immersive, the future use of individuals, who the designer has become as a futurist, as a dreamer, the notion that dreamers are needed amongst our very rigid nominalist cultures. Here's Evolo magazine, famous for a skyscraper competition. This is downtown New York with new buildings inserted with photographic processes. Looks like beautiful renderings, much like the Bruegels of utopian societies and nightmarescapes and things of that nature. Just a feast for the eye that I'll post online. These metabolist cities just growing between buildings organically, with allowing the boots on the ground. Interesting mushroom cloud city, irony, sense of self-criticism, and even making something as fantastical as a skyscraper, as a city, as the one thing representing the whole city. The snapshot, the church tower, the cathedral, the Empire State Building. That thing alone represents the totality of what you're looking at in a complex form. These things are fantastic. They're tall. They're egotistical. They're phallic. They're resolving some notion of tensions in society. They're exclusive. You can't imagine the subalterns or the poor or the impoverished going to these places. In Dubai, I tried to get a tour to the top, which would cost money, take time. The wait was 2 hours. I was only there for basically 4 days. Spent most of my time in hotel bars because there are no bars in town. Went to the mall with the ski slope in it. Interesting notion, perhaps Islamic notion of the spectacle city. Is it for the foreigners? Is it for themselves? Is it for some shadow aspect of themselves? The skyscraper represents the shadow self, manifest also. Pure ego, pure, unabashed capitalism, top dogs, alpha dogs. You exist in a society of alpha dogs. You are nothing, but you can aspire to this, or perhaps with their grace, you can even wait, pay a bunch of money, and go to the top. A snapshot of some enduring factor that happened with the pyramids. Jump to imperial spectacular Rome, the city as spectacle. A gate on the corner facing Appia Antica was inlaid with sculpture gold. It could be seen for miles. As you approach Rome, you're surrounded by tombs. You're surrounded by death itself. This notion that death, Thanatos, was not subject to prohibition, but integral part of your society, was always there in the Roman society, even to the point of excess in the blood sports. We go to the European cathedral. The collective projects, a revision of chattel slavery into a type of disembodied slavery, giving yourself for the future world. The temples of Mesoamerica, of Angkor Wat. These monuments, two simple functions, exist for spectacle, to give a snapshot of the complexity of the city, snapshot into raw power. But if you aren't completely drinking the Kool-Aid, a snapshot into the eternal aspects of the disposable economy, the economy of pump and dump, the economy of potlatch, as in the Quetico Indians of Pacific Northwest, destroying their wealth in front of other chieftains to show how advanced they are. Their their ability to destroy, superimposed by Bataille into our notions of the neoliberal economy, the creative destruction of war. Um, Perhaps even hearkening as a kid who grew up in the Cold War, the creative destruction by nuclear means of the city. And from that response came its little brother, little sibling, little sister, the internet, in the DARPA project. If the ultimate logic of creative destruction, like the ultimate logic of surveying a whole society looking for potential terrorists within each person as an illogical response, the ultimate potlatch is the destruction of life itself. And the best, like the skyscraper representing the city represents the totality of individuals. And with that, one of the illogical conclusions is the destruction of that itself through nuclear means. Something I grew up with every day. Um, the part represents the whole. The city represents the countless individuals now monitored through Internet of Things. The skyscraper represents the whole city. The Empire State Building still, the Freedom Tower, strangely named the Freedom to Destroy Tower. Um, we are living in this society, particularly through gig economies, of the necessity for creative destruction. Not a new thing. Um, uh, Millennia old. Um, Perhaps the city best embodies that, destroying the natural environment in order to live in these unnatural places, having a toll on the environment, as in the book before by Smith, Professor Smith. The notion that garbage was disposable, even in the ancient world, what to do with garbage. This remains. What do we do with the things we make and now have to destroy to remake other possibilities? To be continued. Thank you.